Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us here for the pre-workshop forum. My name is Graham Such. I'm going to be emceeing throughout the morning and afternoon for us. And before we begin, I'd like to invite the founding members of the Alberta Rural Connectivity Coalition to introduce themselves and the ARCC to everyone who's joining us here today.
So I take it, Graham, that's my cue to go first.
Well, I have Imran here who's going to jump on, yeah, as well
Great.
as Kimberly as well too. So, Imran, if you'd like to carry us away.
There we go. Yeah, thank you, Graham, and thanks everyone for being here for the first annual Alberta Rural Connectivity Forum. So we wanted to start off today's event with just a quick acknowledgement about the coalition, how it kind of came into being, and kind of where we're hoping it goes.
I'm just online with this now, Megan.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah, so the coalition was born kind of out of this group of organizations, Cybera being one of them, and the discussions we had over the course of COVID in response to the pandemic. So we were finding that within our own spheres, kind of, Cybera is more on the post-secondary side, the kind of gaps we were seeing, which obviously were accelerated during COVID, but predated it as well, right? So while kids were struggling to get connected to go to school, parents were struggling to get connected to stay at work. While it's worse, it obviously, as we all know, has been a problem for a long time in Alberta. And the coalition, in our view, is one way to approach that, which is to bring all of these organizations together under a unified understanding, a very broad mission statement, which is to pursue affordable, high-speed internet universally across Alberta for everybody, including rural, remote, and First Nations. So that is what the coalition's about. I would encourage everybody to check the website out. I believe it's kind of been scrolling across the screen quite a bit, but I'll make sure it's in the chat as well. But I would encourage everybody to take a look at it. If you're an organization, a not-for-profit or public institution, please consider supporting it. And we're hoping to grow the coalition, grow events like this. This is the first of many, hopefully, and hopefully it gets bigger over time. So that's kind of a broad overview, and I'll invite Bob to kind of expand on that.
Thanks, Imran, and good morning, everybody. My name is Bob Spalko. I'm with the Northeast Alberta Information Hub, formerly known as Alberta Hub. We're one of 9 regional economic development alliances across Alberta, and Alberta Hub, along with the other REITAs, have spearheaded the issue of broadband and the need for broadband in rural Alberta over the last 6, 7, 8 years. In Alberta Hub's case, we currently have 43 members. They include municipalities, colleges, business, and industry, all working together to build wealth in our region. And this comes through different projects, different activities like business support, enabling investment on a regional basis, diversifying the economy and enabling investment and creating a great quality of life. Now, to achieve a great quality of life, the focus has always been, or has been, on providing electricity, natural gas, and roads. Well, as we all know today, the focus is on broadband connectivity to support and have access to education, healthcare, and to enable business growth. Now, prior to COVID, the need for high speed was building. There was a trend towards it. And the pandemic has emphasized this need now more than ever, because it is events that change things. So again, like I mentioned, Alberta Hub, along with the other 8 REITAs representing over 250 municipalities across Alberta, have been bringing this issue forward to its members and all levels of government, ensuring rural Alberta is a major contributor to our economic activity and providing that great quality of life. We've executed reports indicating the current state, the desired state, and potential strategies to our communities for projects. And this includes working with ISPs. These reports were provided to the government of Alberta, made known to the CRTC, that are very important to this initiative. In the Alberta Hub region, 2 community projects have moved forward as a result of Alberta Hub's work on this, and you'll hear from one of those at this event, the town of Vermilion. Alberta Hub, on behalf of the Ritas, teamed up with Cybera, RDN, Michael McNally, Rob McMahon, to bring you this first Alberta Rural Connectivity Forum, focusing on internet access issues and opportunities for rural residents, businesses, and public organizations. And we look forward to more organizations joining us in this coalition. 2 things I would like you to keep in mind as we move forward through these sessions. When you do think about connectivity or broadband for your municipality, think about education, healthcare, and business growth, not the fiber, not the towers or the wireless. Also, secondly, broadband needs to be thought of as infrastructure, capacity, reliability, affordability, and choice. I feel those are very two important things to keep in mind. And I really thank everybody for attending today, and I do hope you find value in this forum. Well, thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Imran.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I was just asking Kimberly if she had anything she wanted to say.
Thanks, Imran, and thanks for the opportunity to represent the Regional Economic Development Alliances in this coalition. I'm really excited about the next 2 days and learning more and having communities share their experiences of developing community internet, or bringing it into their communities. Just a couple really quick points. In central Alberta, we have, of course, we have Olds, who is the spearheader and the trailblazer of community connectivity. But we also have Red Deer County and Clearwater County, both of whom were able to utilize the information that and the research that was done by the Ritas to move their initiatives forward. In the end, I like alliteration. So I look at the 3 C's: collaboration, connectivity, and competition. And in today's world, we need that connectivity and we need collaboration to get it done, so that Alberta can continue and grow its level of competitiveness in the global economy. We're no longer just playing locally, we are playing globally, and the pandemic has emphasized that even more. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks so much again on behalf of the Regional Economic Development Alliances. Have a great conference.
Thank you very much, Kimberly and Bob. I'm just going to bring Dr. Michael McNally on stage.
Hi, Imran, and welcome everyone. And Imran, if you could just give me a thumbs up, my screen is being shared properly there?
It looks like it, yeah.
Okay, well then I will get into Broadband 101. And again, like the other coalition members, I want to thank everyone for joining over the next 2 days. And of course, highlight as well that if you can't join the coalition in an institutional capacity, we do have the ability to participate as an individual member as well. So I'm going to be going through a really high-level overview discussion of some real foundational aspects of broadband. There will be time for questions at the end, and then time for questions. I'll stick around for some of the lunch time. So there's lots of time to ask questions, but this is really meant to provide an overview and a snapshot of a bit of the current context, as well as some of the key issues that will kind of inform and come up across the next 2 days. So I want to begin and highlight, this is a map from the CRTC. And if you look at it, you can see, obviously the Windsor to Quebec City corridor is very well connected. But if you look at, the northern parts of the larger provinces, and certainly the prairie provinces, Alberta has done well. And that's something we should keep in mind as we discuss things, is that on the whole, we are a well-connected province, particularly if you look at Saskatchewan right next door. So those different shades of colors there represent different technologies, and it's not crucially important at this point to distinguish between them. But really the emphasis is that, on the whole, Alberta has done well for a large province. That said, this is a slightly different map, kind of zoomed in on the Calgary-Edmonton corridor. And you can see the places in green. Those are inhabited areas that don't have broadband that meets the CRTC's new target speed, and I'll cover that in a bit. And the orange are communities without access to high capacity transport. So we have a lot of areas in this province, many of them rural and certainly many of them remote, where there isn't that kind of high-end capacity and connectivity. And if you don't like the map, I have it here in a table format as well. Again, this is again from the CRTC, looking at which communities have that speed target. And as you can see, Alberta does well in the big cities, medium cities, small cities. But it's again the rural communities and the First Nations reserves where we really see huge gaps in the connectivity. And of course, that's exactly what discussions like today are supposed to be about and continue to further. So we've done a lot of work in Alberta in not only having great examples, like Kimberly mentioned, Olds is a real leader, not only in the province, but nationally, but also in having discussions and capacity building across the province, going back all the way to the kind of the original build of Supernet. But one thing we know about broadband is that it's people think, oh, it's going to cost millions or billions, and certainly money is a big issue. People get often scared of the technology. But it's really about conversation. It's about sitting down and talking. And many of the conversations we have in communities, people will understand the importance of different types of pieces of infrastructure. Everyone knows and understands roads and electricity and gas and water. If you've got a hockey arena in your community and it's falling apart, people know, people understand, citizens get, what the value of that, rink is and why you might want to have some discussions about improving it. But broadband isn't often considered in that same category. And it really is, it's, 80% a social issue. If you can get the discussion going and you can get the champions in your community, the money and the technology are really kind of a small piece. So it's about trying to plan it out and think it through and find those leaders in your community to spearhead the discussion. So this is often called, getting to why better broadband. So I'll give you 10 reasons now, and then I've got the best one at the very end. So, economic side of things, business retention. Obviously, you want to keep businesses in your community. Broadband's going to be an important part of that so they can connect globally. At the same time, it facilitates economic growth. New businesses aren't going to come unless they know that they can get the connectivity they need, not only for themselves as a business, but also for their employees. They want to make sure that they have access to broadband. Agriculture, big business in this province, and the future of farming is smart farming. It is agriculture connected with connectivity. One of the biggest companies that's interested in connectivity globally is John Deere. Tourism, we've got many beautiful mountains, other parks all across this province. But one of the biggest drivers now in a lot of thinking around tourism is, can I go to this great spot and get Wi-Fi, be able to get connected? I know some people think, the goal is to get away from technology, maybe when you go out into nature, but it's, broadband is an important part of being able to support tourism. And while we may not be thinking a lot about tourism now, it's certainly going to be an important area to think about as we come out of the pandemic. And here's one we're all perhaps familiar with as we sit in our basements or elsewhere. Telework, the ability to work from home. Of course, there's probably some of you who've had to go into work because you don't have the broadband at home. So those are all economic reasons. We've got just as good reasons on the social side. Healthcare, big interest in telemedicine, remote delivery of services, even remote surgery. Of course, all of that requires better broadband. I come from the education sector myself. I, in fact, teach in a program that is fully online sometimes. And so, our students can come from anywhere, but they have to have the broadband to participate. And of course, I think, now going through the pandemic, we're only going to see the intensification in both healthcare and education of broadband delivered services. Public safety is another one. Of course, there's a lot of different communication channels that, first responders and other public safety officials might use. But having good broadband infrastructure can support a wide array of different types of public safety. Transportation is another big driver. It's, you might see just that one car there on that road. But of course, the argument is down the line, in the future, that's going to be a smart car. And for that to be a smart car, it's going to need to have connectivity all along that road. In some of the larger communities, you can have better solutions in terms of, smart traffic lights and whatnot. But certainly there's, transportation implications. And of course, the last one, getting in touch, whether that's with Edmonton and the provincial government, whether it's for delivering your own municipal or county services, or whether it's, connecting in with the federal programs, push to get government services online will only continue to grow. And again, the pandemic is just going to accelerate all of these 10 reasons as to why a community needs better broadband. So in terms of broadband technologies, I'm going to go through these at a high level. There's lots of details, and we've got lots of different sessions to cover those details. But the oldest, and we know one that's well developed, is the copper phone line system. Many of you might remember that really annoying sound of modems starting up. Canada was a leader in telephone networks. In fact, we were an early leader in broadband because of it. But this technology now is really, it can still be used, but in terms of the future outlook for copper, not very good. Coaxial cable is another one. If you have it in your community, it's certainly something that can be mobilized depending on who owns the technology and who has access to it. It can provide pretty good speeds, but certainly if you're in a community and you're thinking of putting in wired infrastructure, you're going to go with fiber optic cable. It really is, of the three wired technologies, the only one that's kind of future-proof in terms of design. And fiber optic cable, as the name implies, it deals with optics. It's really shining light down a glass tube at the simplest level. And when we think about it, light is really the fastest thing we have. So some of the potential speeds we might be able to get off of fiber optic cable really suggests that it's a well-warranted technology if you're going to invest on the wire side. On the wireless side, that green in that first map that I showed where Alberta was a leader, that's because we have a lot of this. It's called fixed wireless access. It's kind of like your cell phone, except it's connecting to fixed points. It's a good starting point technology for broadband. It's where a lot of communities in Alberta are, but it doesn't necessarily offer or promise a kind of longer term solution. Satellite is one that, of course, in some of the most rural and remote parts of the province is a key technology, but it's one where we've seen really renewed interest, especially over the past past year or so, 10 months, of course, with Elon Musk and others putting up all kinds of satellites. And so there's a real renewed interest now in, not so much the high orbiting kind of geostationary satellites, but these constellations of low Earth orbiting satellites and what kind of connectivity they'll offer. And of course, we'll have some more discussion of this across the next 2 days. And the last one, of course, the one perhaps we're familiar with on the wireless side is our mobile wireless or our cellular. And of course, there's talk now about 5G and what's the 5G outlook, both in urban and rural communities. Potential for some fast speeds here, not as fast as you might be able to get on a wired connection with fiber. But it's important to remember that there's also a need to have some sort of network to carry this, and I'll touch on that a little bit as well. So just quickly on the policy and the regulation side of things, and if this is a confusing and complicated slide, that's because we have a confusing and complicated setup for policy and regulation in this country. And even internationally, we've been pointed out for having this kind of strange setup. On the federal government side, within the federal government proper, there's Innovation, Science and Economic Development, ISED, formerly Industry Canada. And it is a federal department, a crown department that's directly responsible for broadband. It provides funding. It provides a lot of high-level policy on the wireline side of things. So some, broad policy on wired technology, on broadband in general. And then on the wireless side of things, it's got a more active role. It regulates and allocates the spectrum, which is the lifeblood of wireless technologies. and an area where there is, billions of dollars at stake in auction spectrum licenses. So federal government plays an important role there. Many people are also familiar, of course, with the CRTC, the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission. It is the telecommunications regulator, so it is, in formal terms, an arm's length, quasi-judicial regulatory agency. That means it does a little bit of policy setting, but mostly it does more of the nuts and bolts kind of regulation. So a lot of the wireline market is regulated at the CRTC level, so more of a CRTC influence than an ISED influence. It does some wireless policy, and it does some wireline policy as well, and it also has some funding. And so there's this confusing kind of mix and overlap between the two. And then to complicate things, we of course have the Ministry of Rural Economic Development now nationally that is also involved in some policy strategy setting and funding. And then of course there's an array of provincial bodies as well. In Alberta we have two primary ones, Service Alberta, which has run the Supernet, and Jobs Economy and Innovation, JEI, formerly Economic Development and Trade. JEI and previously EDT had been very active in spurring a lot of the work, research work that was done in part by the RETAs and to help prepare communities. So it's a broad and kind of complicated landscape. One thing to note, though, one thing the CRTC does not do is regulate retail rates on either the wireless side or the wireline side, except in the Northwest Territories. So the CRTC will regulate the wholesale market, but it does not control the price of your broadband subscription, or the price is set by any ISP. Just quickly, in terms of what's going on, there's a lot of money at play and has come into play over the last few years. So we're talking more than 4 billion, almost 6 billion, depending on how some of the infrastructure bank spending gets cut on the federal side, plus the CRTC money as well. And there's a lot of interest from the government, of course, in spurring broadband, particularly in rural and remote regions. And to put this in context, if you look at broadband spending from the mid-90s through to about 2016, we spent directly, and it gets hard to track every dollar, somewhere in the $3 billion mark from the federal government's perspective. And so, in the last few years now, we've seen the taps really flow and big scale spending coming. And I saw a presentation by a gentleman from the CRTC a couple of weeks ago, and he noted that they think we're within about $6 to $8 billion of total spending in terms of closing the connectivity gap. Now, it wasn't clear if that includes this money or not, but certainly there are programs and funding initiatives available now for communities. Where do we sit internationally? About in the middle. So this is a comparison done by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, showing the quality of the speeds, and so speed is really the primary metric we use for measuring broadband, and as well as the coverage, and of course big countries, so we don't have the same coverage goals as some of those smaller European countries, nor do we necessarily have the highest speed levels. And I think one important thing to note long term is that Canada, when they first started doing these international comparisons, we were right up there with Korea as the best country in the world for broadband, and we've kind of steadily fallen down over about a 20-year period now to a kind of middle of the pack performer. So our target speed, and that was set in 2016 by the CRTC, is 50 megabits per second download and 10 megabits per second upload. So throughout the next 2 days, you'll probably hear a lot of reference to 50 Mbps, megabits per second, or 5010, and that is kind of the target speed that we are aiming for. We're at getting close to 90%. When the CRTC set the target in 2016, they wanted to get to 90% by the end of 2021. We're getting close to it, but there's a long way to go. That last 10% is the hardest 10% to connect, and the goal is to get everyone in the country to that speed by 2031. Of course, the question is, by 2031, what will that speed be like? Just one thing that's really important to keep in mind in broadband conversations in Alberta is, when you start to think about connectivity, there's two important sets of connections. We tend to often think about the connections in our own community. So, maybe there's an existing cable network, or we're going to put in a fiber network, or we're going to put up wireless towers. And how do we connect the homes and businesses in our own community? And that, sometimes it gets called the last mile connection, sometimes it gets called the first mile connection, but you need, some way of connecting the homes and businesses in your community. You also need some way to connect your community to the broader internet. And, those global internet exchanges, they're called internet exchanges. We're very fortunate in Alberta. We have one in Calgary, we have one in Edmonton. And so the goal is, you also have to think about how do you get that access to the broader internet. So there's really kind of two things to think about. But the good news is, and this is taken from, probably might be a little out of date, but it's from Understanding Community Broadband, which is an Alberta Broadband Toolkit that Economic Development and Trade funded the creation of back in 2016. And this was a snapshot of some of the different business models we saw. There's different types of layers. You can have who owns the actual infrastructure in a broadband network. You can have who operates the network, who controls the switches, and who's providing internet service. And those, I can get into in the questions if you like some of the differences there, but you can disentangle those three levels. And you can also have things, provided on either a private or a public basis. And we've seen all kinds of options all across this province. So in some cases, fully private solutions, relying on the existing internet service providers, all the way to Olds, which of course was a completely public approach, where all three layers were ultimately owned by the Olds Institute. The other key thing, though, is, when you start to think about a solution, think about your neighbor's solution. In the same way, it doesn't make sense at your own home to say, well, I'm going to get better broadband, so I'm going to run a cable from my house all the way to the internet exchange in Calgary or Edmonton. No, of course, it would make sense to connect, everyone on your block and the whole community. At a community level as well, it often makes sense to think regionally, see what the communities are doing around you. And this is a real challenge, is that, particularly if you rely solely on the private providers, they're going to take the most profitable pieces. And that's why, if you think back to that map I had at the Edmonton to Calgary corridor, of course, all the big population centers have been picked off. They're all well served because that's where the profits are. And so if you really want to connect, the remote and rural users and the farms in between, that tends to require a kind of regional solution. One other thing I think that's really important to highlight is the nature of the market in Canada. And this is, of course, something where there is, a fair bit of news in the past, 7 days now. We have a highly concentrated market. I mean, there's lots of internet service providers. We have a lot of tiny internet service providers, even here in Alberta, that might just serve one community or two communities. But overall, the market is dominated by Bell, Rogers, and Telus, and then to a lesser extent, Quebecor and Shaw. So these big companies own huge swaths of the telecom sector, of the broadcasting sector. The table on the left-hand side, that's the kind of entire communications sector, and you can see there that the top 5 companies own 85% of that market. And then you see, the next 5 biggest companies own 8%, and then all the remaining players make up a small little 8% in 2018. On the mobile side of things, so that's our cell phones, and that's one where, study after study suggests, yes, we are paying a very high amount for our cell phone. It's a highly concentrated market, overwhelmingly dominated by Bell, Rogers, and Telus. And of course, a lot of interest, particularly now with the conversations between Rogers and Shaw. What are the implications? It certainly means more concentration in our markets. It will be very tight on the wireless side. Of course, we have Freedom Mobile, which is, of course, Shaw. They have a large presence in Alberta. We would see that kind of get consumed by Rogers. Of course, Rogers has been anticipating also, how might we connect communities across Alberta in the, to kind of address some of the regulatory concerns. So that'll be an ongoing discussion for probably a year. And it's also important to note that our telecom sector, unlike almost every other sector in our economy, except banking and airlines, as well as unlike other foreign countries where they allow a lot of foreign investment, our telecom sector is protected largely from heavy foreign investment. Bell, Rogers, and Telus are domestic companies, but there are some barriers in place that would prevent large foreign companies from coming in. So I have just one last piece, and it's that getting back to why. And I don't know what this building is. It's something from the future. It could be an industry, it could be a health provider, it could be a new type of school. I have no idea what it looks like or how it even works. But you know what? I'm guessing that it's connected to broadband. So if you think back, these are the 5 biggest companies in the world now. 30 years ago, 3 of these companies didn't even exist. I mean, Facebook was a complete figment of the imagination. Jeff Bezos was probably back in 1991, maybe getting the inklings of how he could start Amazon a few years later. And of course, if you go back even 50 years, then you start to take out Microsoft and Apple. So if we want to have some of those the capacity for future solutions, whatever that strange looking building might be, whether it's innovations in the social service or on the economic side, my guess is it's going to require a better connectivity solution, and that's really about putting in the infrastructure side of things today. So that is a broad overview of broadband, and like I said, I'm happy we've got time for questions, and I'm happy to continue to take questions into the lunch hour as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. That was very informative. So for those who want to, feel free to throw some questions in the chat here. I'm just looking at Dave Basto. So he was commenting that we need to future-proof our infrastructure models going forward. Michael, can you kind of comment on for those who might not be necessarily as familiar with connectivity and how you lay the infrastructure? How does one future-proof their assets for future use?
So there's a couple of different ways you can kind of think about making sure that the infrastructure is future-proof. Capacity is a big piece of it. So if you're one of the solutions that you can take on, I mean, it would be great to see a provincial solution or even a national solution, is building the capacity for fiber optic cables through kind of dig once policy, for putting in conduit. If you're doing a construction project in your community that involves tearing up the roads or the sewer line or the water, anything that involves tearing things up, you can put in conduit. It's basically an empty plastic tube. And even if you're not putting in the fiber, you're going to put in, the cost are pennies on the dollar. And then in the future, you can fill that with fiber optic cable at a very low cost. So it's a much more efficient way of doing things. Another thing to think about as well is, there are ways to bootstrap your connectivity solution. So, your community may not be able to necessarily support or get fiber right away, but you can think about, well, maybe we'll go with some fixed wireless, and then we could use some fiber to connect that fixed wireless and connect what's in between, and then keep expanding like that. Mixing different technologies as they're needed. So, there's lots of different potential solutions, but certainly if you're engaged in a construction project, even if you can't put the fiber in now, putting the conduit in for the fiber is a really good approach.
Excellent. Now, I don't know if I necessarily laid the ground rules down for how we do Q&A. Just given, as we do the conference, we're going to have a lot of people joining us. We have over 250 registrants for the forum. However, this is a bit of a smaller audience, so I think I'll allow for some people to ask their questions out loud. Now, I know Nicole Rustard or Rustad, my apologies, I'm bad at pronouncing names sometimes, has a question. So if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question for Michael.
Yeah, so I'm with Mamawakan Tech Society, which is an Indigenous ISP out of Maskwacis, Alberta. And what the thing that we're finding the most problematic is that the big five, yes, we can buy from them, and it is priced so high, the cost for a small ISP in an area with a small amount of people, that it's almost impossible to be competitive. And we know that the big five want to own infrastructure, and that's their the way that they make money, which is hence why Rogers and Shaw are merging, because it's about amalgamation and getting owning the infrastructure so that they control the market. So it really isn't a fair playing field. And I'm just wondering how this collaborative is looking at addressing that issue. Like just for 2 gigs in one community where we were asked to provide service, it was going to be $80,000 a year for us to pay for that, just to pay one of the big five for that backhaul.
Yeah, I think you raise a very important point, Nicole. And so the CRTC is involved in retail rate regulation. They do regulate on the wholesale side of things, and we've seen the CRTC try. I think it was in 2015 they brought in new wholesale regulations, limited it at the time to kind of Ontario and Quebec. But one of the things I think everyone can do is try and keep up the interest and the pressure on the CRTC to continue to look at the wholesale side of the environment and continue to regulate there. It kind of isn't a game of whack-a-mole. The CRTC will come up with some new set of regulations on the wholesale side, and then of course the big infrastructure owning companies will figure out how to foil that over time. So I think that is perhaps an area where we can kind of maintain some interest. And for reference, many of you probably might have been familiar with a previous set of rural broadband conferences in Alberta called Digital Futures. My colleague Rob McMahon and I, we've done a little bit of work looking at, well, what is the impact? And one of the things we did notice is there was a marked increase in Alberta organizations participating at national policy forums. And really, if there was a House of Commons study on rural broadband in 2017, 2018, and there were a lot of Alberta voices, and there was some great recommendations made. The government didn't really accept all of them, but trying to foster capacity amongst communities and amongst organizations, how we could support each other at the CRTC or other policy forums, I think is a good way to make sure voices are heard, because the way a lot of our regulators operate, or the way the CRTC operates, if issues aren't put on the record and submitted to them, they can't address them, even if they know what's going on. Unless it's unless a submission is made, they can't analyze that. So I think that's another thing we can think of and encourage as we think of how the coalition might work going forward.
Excellent.
We'd be really interested in helping with that. Because if we look at Indigenous communities as an example, fiber was laid to every single reserve across Canada in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And the big five have controlled that. And that is a big issue that needs to be addressed at a national level.
Absolutely, yeah.
Excellent. Brent Cobes has a question. Who owns the internet exchange points, and how are they different from transport sites?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head who owns specifically the Calgary and the Edmonton one. So I don't know if someone else wants to put that answer into the chat.
Excellent. I'd wonder if it's like a similar, Calgary is a non-profit.
Yeah.
So it makes me wonder if it would be something similar to like how we manage airports, and that they run as sort of a board society. This question will probably come up in the breakout rooms quite a bit, which is 50 megabits per second. Is it fast enough and for what we need to do online and for us to look forward in the next 5, 10, 20 years?
So, in terms of speeds, 50-10 for an individual person is actually probably fast enough for one person. Listening to online music or basic web browsing, email, that might not even take a megabit per second speed capacity. Streaming, even HD stuff, you could about 5 megabits per second. YouTube, Netflix, Ultra HD, you start to get towards 20. There's some higher end applications, but I don't send X-ray files to anyone ever. Maybe if you want to have a really competitive video game speed. But the important thing to remember is that's one person. If you live in a household, all of the uses are combined. So if you have, a couple of kids, 2 parents, all trying to do different things, those speeds all add up together. And so 50-10 is probably, for most households, probably, in many cases, it's a reasonable speed. On the business side, it's a completely different equation. Businesses, employers need 100 or 1,000. They need significantly more speed to do things. I mean, you get companies that ultimately they'll send, if you have a large enough amount of data, you load it onto hard drives and you ship it via FedEx or UPS because that's fast. So the other thing to keep in mind too is scalability. So technologies like copper are really at the end of their life cycle. We can squeeze 100 megabits per second out of copper over a short distance with nobody else, but you're not going to get it anymore. Cable has some legs into the future, but fiber optic, I mean, if you look at the projected speeds on fiber optic, they're in the hundreds of thousands of megabytes per second. At least until we kind of develop new things. And on the wireless side, the new satellites, the low Earth orbit satellites, they're talking 500 megabits per second there. So you have to think there is a difference between where we are and where we will be. And you have to remember too, there's always a little hype in these technologies. Satellites have been the solution to rural connectivity for 25 years. And now it's really only with these low Earth orbit satellites now that we're starting to see the potential for it.
Now you alluded about some of the legislative review processes. Is the legislative review moving forward? Like, if you could read the tea leaves, where do you anticipate that potentially going?
Yeah, so we did a large, full-scale broadcasting and telecommunications sector review, and so that's a massive swath of Canadian communications policy, and it's important to remember. I mean, we have these really kind of integrated broadcasting and telecom companies, and also markets. I mean, we tend to think of the Canadian cultural market as something we really want to protect. There's been a little bit of movement on the broadcasting side. There's some interest in how can we get either Canadian content regulations and or money out of Netflix. There were a whole slew of telecom recommendations in that telecommunications report. And we really, we haven't seen them yet. And the history, we had an Information Highway Advisory Council task force in the 90s. We had a National Broadband Task Force in the early 2000s. We had a telecommunications review panel in the mid 2000s. And what the government does is, finds 1 or 2 recommendations it likes, implements those, and the whole, massive reorganization, I don't think we'll see. And of course, I think something to keep in mind, there's a lot of public dollars on those slides that are flowing now, and broadband is a very lucky environment. Going forward, public dollars are going to be more scarce around the board. Now, broadband might be an exception there, but something to keep in mind.
Excellent. So a question from Kathy. Are open access broadband networks a potential or partial solution to the problem of concentrated control of networks? And can you speak to the role of them in this environment?
Yeah, so one of the things we've seen different solutions on is mandating that the infrastructure be made available on an open access basis, so that it's kind of at fair, non-discriminatory prices that anyone could use. We've seen in some funding envelopes, there's interest in, ensuring that kind of new infrastructure goes in on an open access basis. The large incumbent players aren't necessarily, I mean, they own infrastructure. They like to own their infrastructure because that's their business model. There are some more radical approaches. I mean, there is something in the policy literature that exists as an option called, functional or structural separation, where we could actually take ownership of infrastructure and delivery of the services of the infrastructure and separate those. And we could do that nationally. Tell Bell and Rogers and Telus that, you can either own the infrastructure and be a service provider in terms of you sell access to the infrastructure, or you can sell content that goes over the infrastructure, but not both. That's a pretty radical approach. It would be well out of step. And something that Canada has, it's baked into our approach on telecommunications, is called a focus on facilities-based competition. So we have historically and kind of continued to want to build companies that provide infrastructure and the services that go on top of them.
Sort of speaking in the vein of infrastructure, Shabam has a question. Do you think that the Supernet/Bell network is sufficient for Alberta's needs, or is there a requirement for increase in capacity through Alberta for the overall transportation network?
Yeah, so Supernet, I think, of course, is a very unique response, and we've seen different provinces have different responses, and I kind of do want to give full credit to the kind of thinking around Supernet that started, that we build this provincial backbone transport network, connects 429 communities at POPs or Meet Me facilities. I think the execution then on that agreement, the first agreement in particular, didn't live up to the hype. We'd have stories of, a county would know where the Supernet box is, but that was it. They had no idea how to connect anything other, or it was just the library that was connected to it. Supernet was never meant to necessarily be, a backhaul solution for everything. It was, partially designed to kind of link the municipal side of things. There's always a need. We have lots of transport infrastructure in this province. It's, as kind of Nicole's question kind of suggested to, it's making sure that there's terms for access to it that's really kind of key. And whether those are, competition is one way to do it. It's hard to compete on backbone pipes. Not a lot of people are going to put those in. Regulation is another option as well. And there's always, the potential for new solutions. I mean, the low Earth orbit satellites are, going to be able to do backhaul kind of through space. So it's a kind of different approach.
Excellent. So not necessarily a one-size-fits-all solution to all of these things.
Yeah, actually, and I want to jump right in on that point. That I think that's, overwhelmingly the literature, the discussions I've been involved in for the last almost decade now have said it's, there is no one, I mean, if there was a one-size-fits-all best model, surely we'd have implemented it by now. It's usually a community by community approach. And so it's getting that enabling framework from the province and from the federal government. Part of that is money, part of that is policy. And that's where, communities can work together, because, one community may want to go with a private company and fiber, one community may want to create their own wireless provider, but making sure the framework works for both of them is a kind of shared interest.
Excellent. Rick has a question. If and when our broadband issues are solved nationally, are there follow-up plans about the IT management and computer technology needed at the end of the connection? And would a not-for-profit be ready to capitalize on that connection?
That's I think there's an important kind of nugget there in terms of, well, what happens once we get the connectivity infrastructure? And I think there are going to be issues around, making sure the electronics at the end of the wires are kind of up to date. That, I know that was some of the challenges with Supernet, was the suggestion that the fiber optic cable was perfectly fine. It was the electronics at either end of the wire that were the challenge. But something we need to kind of keep thinking of, it's Those technologies, of course, are going to need to continue to be approved, and we're going to also need, the digital skills that are necessary. It's a continually evolving online environment. We're going to need to make sure that we have a citizenry that's able to take advantage of this technology as well.
Speaking on the sort of the vein of the implementation side of things, how could the broadband deployment leverage how our electricity grid was developed? And it kind of ties to the question right now of some people actually paying more for internet than they are actually paying for electricity in this province.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of interesting points with regards to electricity and also gas. Development of infrastructure offers us different models, and we see different approaches, not only across the province, across the country in terms of how gas. Got a lot of places it was co-ops, and we've seen co-ops have had a little bit of a model as well on the internet side of things. With regard to electricity too, it's important to note that there's fiber optic cable in the electrical infrastructure that has always been, how can we not unlock that for backhaul, or has always been a point of discussion as well. But there is certainly, different pieces, and we've seen, with the infrastructure bank. One of the big things they like to do now, the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, is tie infrastructure projects together. So if you're putting in, I think they've got a big envelope, if you're putting in electrical cables, putting in fiber with those, so pairing the projects as well. So there's a lot of lessons, I think, from electricity in terms of how might we, are there business models or solutions there, as well as how can we going forward co-locate or get access to some of this existing infrastructure.
It's funny you tied into that. I was reading some of the comments in the chat, and one of the comments that comes out is about sort of the dark fiber that Calgary has laid throughout the city. Do you think there's enabling policies to try to encourage more of that development or future proofing, if you will?
Certainly, having municipalities and David Basto, I know you're in the audience. So if you want to jump in and talk specifically on the Calgary fiber side of things, I know you've got a lot of experience there. But, certainly having that municipal infrastructure is really valuable. And I think, there's people often just default to thinking the infrastructure is for the internet, and that is not true. You can have municipal infrastructure that's connected via broadband infrastructure, water treatment plant or whatever, and it doesn't need to have the internet. It doesn't need to be about the internet. It's about the connectivity. And so there's value in municipalities thinking about how do we connect our municipal infrastructure, and then maybe there is some spin-off benefits for a community network or something else like that.
Excellent. From Campbell, he says, could you comment on how the facility-based competition regime has contributed to the digital divide?
Yeah, I mean, the facility-based competition regime really has created it's a problem. Often called some of the donut hole problem. And so if we tend to build infrastructure where you're going to get the return on investment, and that is where there's people. And so we've seen competition. There's really good competition for internet in big cities, and medium cities have medium competition. You get down into the rural level, and it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to have any competition in infrastructure in small, rural, and certainly remote environments. And you want a really good example of that is, look at the territories, to think of the Northwest Territories above us. They have a single monopoly provider. And of course, myself and my colleague Rob have been involved in some work there. We get stories of people paying $1,000, $2,000 a month in overage fees on the internet. So there's no doubt, owning infrastructure and encouraging competition in infrastructure works in that Quebec to Windsor corridor where there's, the population density. Does it work in, northern Alberta and beyond? No, probably not. So it's, certainly a challenge when, you're going to encourage one company to spend, millions of dollars to put in infrastructure. Hard to incent another company to come after that and build its own infrastructure when the first company's already kind of captured the customers.
Got a message here from Cole, which is quite a creative one. Is there any potential in using Alberta's increased number of abandoned pipelines to facilitate new fiber pulls / build outs in rural areas? And I guess in the vaguest terms, like, it doesn't have to be oil and gas pipelines, but could be decommissioned water ones or high pressure natural gas ones.
I don't know. I'm not on the kind of engineering side as to whether you might be able to use that infrastructure without having to dig it up, and which of course then you might as well put in the new stuff. But I think it's something to something to consider is always how can we take existing infrastructure projects, if money's going in to to decommission something. It's probably worth asking some questions if there's some way to reuse that for another technology. But offhand, I don't have any experience of or have heard of the ability to reuse that type of infrastructure easily in any sense.
All right, and before we open up the breakout rooms, our final question: how do you think Starlink will affect the current market when their service launches?
It'll be an interesting, challenge, particularly I think in the some of the fixed wireless communities. So, some of the initial reports on Starlink, of course, the hardware, the $700 you're going to need to put out at front is a high price. I think in those communities that are still on the kind of fixed wireless model, it'll be a big challenge. And of course, we have a lot of fixed wireless communities here, and we've seen, CCI was an old big fixed wireless player. It got consumed by Xplornet, and Xplornet, of course, has now been kind of heavily foreign capitalized. So Xplornet, of course, has got some old traditional satellites. So it'd be interesting to see how that moves some of the market in the more rural and remote places. Cost is always a big factor as well. So if they can, Starlink or any of the other low Earth orbit satellite players can get the costs down, there's certainly fixed wireless customers that may migrate because the speeds certainly seem better. So.
Excellent. Michael, thank you for the overview. I think for a lot of people who are joining here who want to fix their issues that they're dealing with in their community or want to be part of the solution, this was a very good overview for them to sort of catch their breath and understand some of the intro technological stuff that applies to this issue. So thank you so much.